Milo Whitcomb, who's one of the Whitcomb boys that was in World War II. Now, he had three other brothers that
Three
were in
brothers.
World War II.
Right,
And
right.
there were, what, 6 boys? How many boys?
There was 5 boys
5 boys.
and
Yeah.
1 girl.
And 1 girl in the family. So all you boys basically
And
went to
her,
the service.
and yeah, right. Mary Jane's husband also.
Went to the service too.
Right.
So wow, so there's a real patriotic family to say the very least. And he's going to tell us about his experiences in World War II and what's happened to him starting back in those days. So we'll take it from there, okay. So when you see that little red light, we're going, and
Oh, okay.
you're doing great. So tell us your name, when you were born, all that sort of stuff.
Well, my name is Milo Whitcomb, and I was born in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, in 1924. And we moved to Sterling in 1935, and that's, and then I joined the service in 1943.
What did your family do here in Sterling?
Well, my father came over here to start a finance business in 1935. It was called People's Loan and Investment Company.
Okay.
And he later also sold Packard automobiles and Nash automobiles, which are pretty much a thing of the past.
Right.
But we liked Sterling. It was a nice town. Of course, Scottsbluff was a nice town. I always considered that my hometown, but Sterling's kind of grown on to me now. So
Yeah, you've been here a while.
been here a while. I'm almost a native.
Yeah, right.
But
And how many? Tell us how many we got on there. How many there were of you children?
there were 6 children in the family, 5 boys and 1 girl.
Okay.
I'm the 5th child. I have 1 younger brother.
Okay.
The other's a sister, and the other brothers are all older than myself.
Okay.
And
Now, tell us about where you were and what happened to you and how you got in the service.
well, I joined it was the Army Air Force at that time, which they changed to the Air Force shortly after World War II. And I joined in 1943 and went to Army Basic in Wichita Falls, Texas, which they called Shepherd Field. And then from there we went to Pullman, Washington for a couple months of what they called a short-term college education, and which that's like I also attended. Like one fellow said, he attended college also. He went there for 3 days and found out he didn't like it, so he came home, but he'd still been a college boy. So, but they went from there to Santa Ana, California for pre-flight, where you went through mostly testing and physicals and whatnot.
How old were you then?
I was 18 then.
18 years old.
Right.
And you signed up for the Army Air Force.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I wanted to fly, and so then we went from pre-flight in Santa Ana.
What kind of airplanes you flying? Were you flying airplanes?
No,
Not then.
that was strictly testing.
Okay.
You done your physicals, mentals, and what all, and in Santa Ana you qualified for either pilot, navigator, or bombardier, or you didn't qualify. If you didn't qualify, you end up generally being a gunner. And I was lucky enough I qualified for what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a pilot. And so from there I went to Visalia, which was Sequoia Field for primary. We flew Stearmans. We were real lucky. We had brand new Stearmans. They were the first airplanes, first Stearmans to be used, and they were all brand new, never been flown. And excuse me, like our instructor told us, they were one of the finest airplanes, in their opinion, that you could do anything with the airplane you wanted to do in the air. There was only 2 ways of hurting the airplane, and that was to overspeed the engine or hit the ground. And he said as long as you didn't do that, you could put it in any position, do anything with it, and you'd never hurt the airplane, which we did. We enjoyed it. I liked Stearman very much.
Stearman was a bi-wing plane?
Bi-wing, right. And I don't remember what size engine it had, but it was a two-place, which I was kind of surprised. You learned to fly from the back seat. You never flew from the front seat, which I always thought you'd fly from the front seat, but
right.
you didn't. And from there we went to Merced for basic. We flew BT-13s, which mainly your primary training was in 3 phases, more or less. Your primary was you learned actual flying and aerobatics. I mean, learned to do a little of everything. And basic, you started in with formation flying, and then in advanced you went to formation and instruments and the whole ball game, gunnery and whatnot. But in basic, we flew the BT-13s.
What kind of plane was that?
Airplane.
Was that a low-wing plane?
That was a low-wing, 2-cockpit plane.
Yeah.
With it did have a canopy, and we did have you had a radio. You could talk back and forth to your instructor, or you called the tower. In primary, when you come in to land, you got in the landing pattern. When you turned final approach off, you got the green light and you landed, and if you got a red light, you went around.
Whoa, yeah.
Right, and then basic, of course, you had radio that they told you you're clear to land. You called generally on base leg and told them that you're on base leg and clearance for landing, and they would clear you to land.
Right.
And then it went, from there we went to advanced. I went to Luke Field in Phoenix, Arizona for advanced, and we flew T-6s there, which were the next thing to a combat aircraft, which, matter of fact, they were a combat aircraft at the very start of the war. They were equipped with machine guns and whatnot for training purposes, and then the actual war, till they got more fighter aircraft, T-6s were actually used. They were very similar to a Japanese Zero. But there we flew instruments and had gunnery. We fired on tow targets, strafing targets and whatnot. And pretty much prepared you for
combat, huh?
Combat,
yeah.
Right. And then from there we went into P-51s there, and
now what time frame are we talking about now? How old are you? 19 yet?
Yes, I graduated in '44. So yes, I was 19.
19 years old. Okay.
Right.
I think that's important for people to realize. That.
Right.
The guys were really young.
Yeah, but we were eager. We were, we wanted to get into like I say, we were mad at the Japanese and the German people. I mean, we were going to get them. You know,
right.
I mean, everybody says more or less they were ready, and
that's why there was so much volunteerism in World War II.
Right. Everybody wanted to get in there. I mean, they wanted to get them. They were. I mean, like the old saying, they stirred a sleeping dog when they attacked the American people in Pearl Harbor.
Right.
But because the people, they come to right quick there. But of course, we're flying P-51s. We had the same thing. We flew formation, had gunnery, and were ready. And we were thinking all the time we're going to be shipped over pretty quick.
Right.
And they asked for 40 volunteers out of our group, and we thought...
How many were in your group? How many pilots?
Oh,
about?
I don't remember. I think around 60 or 70, I believe. And we thought we were going to get a new fighter because just not too long before that they'd come out with a new night fighter, which they called the Black Widow. And we were impressed. We'd seen them. Matter of fact, over our barracks when we were flying P-51s, they came right over, and when their field was right next to ours, and they would make the shutters fly off the windows when they'd come across our base in the morning.
Really rattled your cage, huh?
And we couldn't wait. We thought, boy, we're going to get something really new and hot. And of course, they put us on a train, and when we ended up, there was nothing but row after row of B-17s. And of course, that was a real interesting experience. We'd never flown anything but fighters, and as you went through cadets, they always had one line on that says your preference to fly, and you always put fighters. And so as a result, we went through single-engine fighter training and presumed that that's what we'd have to end up flying. Well, we ended the B-17s, and they informed us, well, we'd be checked out. And they trained gunners where they checked us out at Kingman, Arizona. And so the pilot that was going to start checking me out, we get in there, and I'm sitting there, and he's explaining everything to me, and there are, of course, rows of B-17s facing each other. And the first thing after we start our engine, he goes through all the procedure, and he says, now, you want to be real careful because this takes a lot more room than other aircraft that you're used to flying. And it powers the outside, the #1 engine, and turns the right end, takes the wingtip and knocks the nose out of the B-17 right across from us. And I was real impressed with him. And,
I'll bet.
So we took off, and we were training gunners. At that time, we trained them for aerial gunnery, had P-63s attacking us, or P-39s, and for aerial gunnery. But on the strafing range, we went out, and they had markers across Arizona. If you've ever been in Arizona, you know it's just big canyons one after the other, and they had dummy tanks and trucks and whatnot along these markers. And we start down these markers, and this fellow that's checking me out says, well, he said, we just follow these markers right down here and stay about 50 feet off the ground and let these gunners practice trying to get these dummies. And he said, I'm going back there and see if I can hit some of them too. He said, you just keep her on that markers about 50 foot off. So the first time I'm in a 4-engine aircraft, never flown anything but a P-51 and single engine, and I'm sitting there. And of course, there's a little difference, like I say, a difference between a sports car and an 18-wheeler. And I figure I'm staying about 50 feet. Of course, some of those canyons come up, or rim rocks come up pretty fast, and the ball turret gunner finally calls up and says, sir, could we get a little higher? We're about to hit these trees on some of these bushes here. And of course, I wasn't too impressed with being
The ball
checked
turret
out.
guy, he was the guy underneath.
The guy on the
Right.
belly.
Right.
And of course, it was quite a difference. I mean, on a B-17, you knew there was no doubt on who was firing a gun. I mean, if your chin turret was firing, you're chattered up. Your top turret was firing, you chattered down. Your side gunner's shooting, why, you
It'd
could
swing
feel
you,
it.
huh?
It would squirm the airplane. The same with your tail gunner. You'd be going like this. And it was a different experience. And we
How
learned.
fast were you going? What was your airspeed?
Oh, the airspeed was generally around 150 to 60 knots.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the World War airplanes were all redlined around 400 was their top
speed.
speed,
Yeah.
and you didn't redline them very often. I mean, it was in like a P-51 you would in a dive, of course. But that was part of it. You would do that in a P-51, but a B-17 you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But as it ended up, why we flew B-17s, and then we got checked out in those, and then I went to Lincoln, Nebraska, at the Overseas Replacement Depot, and we thought we'd be shipped over from there, but as it ended up, we just went to anti-submarine unit, and all we did from then on was fly over the Atlantic Ocean 8 to 12 hours a day, and you would fly 8 to 10 or 12 hours and come back and be off 24 hours and go 8 to 10, 12 hours.
Go do it again, eh?
Yeah.
How long did you do that?
I done that for almost a year then.
A year then?
Before we got out, right. That's what I ended up doing, and that's...
You ended up doing that to the end of the war?
Right.
How many years service then?
I was in almost 3.
3 years. So it took you about 2 years to get...
Well, really only about 2.5. I got out in November of 45. We were one of the first ones to get out, luckily, and when the war was over, because they didn't figure there'd be many submarines, I guess.
What, like you did that, I suppose, the North Atlantic, watching convoys and stuff like that, right?
Right.
And did you see subs, or did you?
We didn't. Our unit got credit for 3 submarines, but I wasn't one of the
spotters.
But that's why.
But that you'd spot them, and then what? Some destroyer or tin can?
No, we carried depth charges.
Oh, you had the
We
stuff.
had live. Oh yeah, we had our 50 caliber machine guns for when if you got a sub surfaced, it was had machine guns for strafing. That's why we figured they wanted fighter pilots, because we were more familiar supposedly for strafing and whatnot.
Right.
But and depth charges you went over. I mean, we carried those. We had a load of depth charges and 50 calibers, and we were armed,
ready to go.
We were ready, but like I say, it was kind of at the time a disappointment. When you're figuring on playing the game and you end up being the water boy. But it was part of it. I guess somebody had to do it, but you hoped it'd be somebody besides yourself.
Well, you're probably in a better, safer place than the fighter pilot.
It was. I wasn't very much for swimming though. Overall, that water. It's amazing. You don't realize how much water there is on the earth till you fly over that much of it for that many hours and hours and hours.
To just fly out and turn around and fly back, or fly certain pattern?
We flew patterns. There was generally, I don't remember if there was 10 or 12 ships, B-17s, in our flights, and we all flew patterns. We had they'd send us on one pattern, and one, matter of fact, they would change, they sent us to West Palm Beach for a while, and we flew a pattern, went clear to Cuba, and had a pattern down that direction. It's where they anticipated there might be
subs in there, huh?
Subs, yes. Yeah. And it was just what the Defense Department, they'd done all the planning for, where we were to patrol. But of course there were a lot more subs in the American waters than people realized, but it was never publicized for the fact that they didn't want to excite the people that there was they could actually be this close.
Right.
But they did. They were in our shipping lanes, and they were also in the shipping lanes south towards Australian places.
Right.
And so
Were those Australian? Those were Jap subs though, in the Australian side.
right,
Not
right,
German. Yeah.
right,
You were hunting German subs
Right.
basically. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right. And but they
How
were,
many sorties or how many flights would you guess you made? Did you have any idea?
Oh, I had the hours. I'm sure over 100,
So you
because I think my time in B-17s was 1,200 and some hours.
1,200 hours. Yeah.
So
That's a lot of flying.
Yeah, it was a lot of time, and the biggest part of that course was on flights. The training wasn't that. I don't remember. I think they figured we were checked out after, I think, 20 some hours in a
Is that all?
B-17. And it didn't take long then.
Huh?
It didn't take long then. It was really in a B-17. It was your pre-flight stuff, which was very important. I mean,
Checking all the engines. and
everything
stuff.
right, checking everything out. But it was an education. I wished after the war I stayed in the rescue outfit in Denver at Lowry Field, so I could keep up on my flying. And they had different type aircraft that had available to us. They had from T6s and SA-16s and DC-3s, but of course.
Those are all cargo type planes or big planes or.
Well, an SA-16 was amphibious.
Oh.
That the reason they got it was it had reversible props on it, that was the first one that they'd had in the service. But the scuttlebutt was that the Navy had turned it down in California, so the rescue outfit in the mountains took it
So
over.
they handed it off.
It was a very underpowered aircraft. It had 2 Pratt & Whitney 550s in it, but it had that big amphibious hull and had a radar dome on the left wing, and on search missions over the mountains, you didn't know if you were going to make it over the mountain a lot of times.
Just couldn't
It
get
was
it up.
underpowered for this altitude. That's why we were surprised that it was even accepted as rescue aircraft in high altitude like this.
Right.
But I enjoyed the rescue outfit. I got to fly different types, and I did get to fly helicopters, which that's what I wanted to get checked out in those. But I didn't get enough time before they recalled our outfit. But I was getting time in helicopters when I'd go in just on weekends when I could.
In the reserve.
Right.
Yeah. How long did you stay in the reserve?
I stayed in reserve until 1950, the
1950.
Korean War.
Yeah.
And I would thought of making a career of it at that time, except for the fact that before the Korean War come on, pilots in the rescue outfit, the service, the Air Force, well, they had changed it to the Air Force then, and the Air Force were getting new pilots, of course, all the time coming out of training, and they were pilots, if your name come up on a list, why, they would separate you, and you could stay in as a master sergeant, but you lost your rank.
Oh, really?
And you lost your flying status.
Yeah. Didn't get the
So
fly.
you lost your flying pay, and it nobody wanted to do that very bad. Now I knew some fellows there that they separated them, and so they just got a job in Denver and stayed in that rescue outfit. And then when the Korean War come in, why, they called them back in with the same or a higher rank, which was all right. But then as soon as the Korean War was over, I figured, well, now they're going to kick you out
Drop 'em
again.
back,
So,
yeah.
but I'd have had enough years to made it worthwhile for going for 20 years, you know.
Sure.
Except for the fact that I figured, well, as soon as this is over, why, they'd drop you out again. So
What was your highest rank? What were you?
was first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
Right.
And you were the pilot in command
Right.
on your plane, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
That was, but it was an experience and an education that I was sorry I didn't take advantage of it. When we got out after the war, the airlines were, of course, in its infancy at that time, and they were hiring ex-Air Force pilots, but they said that they had applications, you know, out where we got separated, and you had to start. They said you had to fly co-pilot for 3 years, and you started out at about $300 a month. Well, at the time in the service,
is that right?
oh yeah, I was making 400 and something in the service, which was, you know, and I thought, well, God, I can make more money than that, you know.
Right.
And have not fly co-pilot for 3 years. But as it turned out, some of the buddies I had in there went with the airlines, and in 6 months they were flying first pilot and had a raise in pay, and it ended up being a real good career.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, a lot of them retired in a matter of 15, 20 years, a real good retirement. But your hindsight's always better than your foresight, and you never know. But the airlines, of course, exploded after the war. Just new airlines and larger and larger aircraft and everything. But we could have went right in, but it didn't look that good at the time to me. So
What were some of the most exciting or dangerous things that you got into? Like, did you ever have, like engine failures or problems?
no, we were lucky.
Just didn't have anything like that.
Didn't. The only thing, you just hoped everything went good over the water out there. You had, of course, life rafts and that on board aircraft all the time, but we lost a couple crews. Well, it was the one that lost their radio and come in the dark and landed on top of the other one, but
Wow.
lost both crews in that. But that was the only casualties that we had in our whole outfit during the war.
Well, you were lucky. Did you get any medals, citations, or awards?
Oh, the general good conduct and marksmanship and whatnot there. I didn't get the one that I definitely didn't want, and that was a Purple Heart. So
Right, you sure did.
that was that. No, that was.
Were you ever in a situation where enemy aircraft came after you or anything like that?
No.
You guys never did
No,
that.
we never.
Didn't get close enough to Europe to do
No.
that, I suppose.
No, we
Yeah.
didn't. No, we'd had some of the pilots in our outfit. That was what was surprising. I don't know. We had pilots in our outfit. We had one pilot, they called him the $1 million pilot. He had ditched 3 times over Europe. And of course, B-17 at that time was worth about $100,000, so you can imagine how many he'd ditched over $1 million worth of aircraft.
It's that right.
But,
Bailed out and
right.
abandoned them.
And we were in the ready room in I believe it was when we were in Florida, but there was another pilot in there that was in the office there, and we were complaining. Of course, they sent us out in a lot of bad weather, which they didn't do it intentionally, but this pilot had remarked something about, well, I hope they didn't, they indicating the line squall that we were going through on the area we were supposed to cover, and he said, well, I hope we didn't hit another one like they did before. They flew them into the center of a thunderstorm in the middle of the night with no moon, and before they knew, normally you could see where your centers are and fly around them, but they got in the middle of it, and they were in a dive going straight down and gaining about 300 or 400 feet a minute. It was that violent in the middle of it, and the water jug flew up and knocked the pilot out and a few things like that. But he was complaining to this lieutenant in there. This fellow was a captain that they called the $1 million pilot, and this lieutenant was standing there, and he said, Captain, he said, what would you do if you're surrounded by about 3 ME-109s? And this captain says, boy, he said, I don't know. He said, that'd be a kind of a picnic, I guess. He said, about the least I've seen is about 30 or 35 of them.
30 or 35.
Yeah. And that was the one that had been shot down. He ditched once in the channel. He ditched over Europe once and got out with the underground. And another one they just did almost get back to the field before they had to ditch. But
Jeez.
there was a lot of, I don't know how they had the mix, unless those pilots just wanted to keep their flying time, because there's some of us that had never been across, and then some that were in the outfit too that had been served a lot of missions over there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you so then you came back to Sterling, did you, or you came back to the States?
Right.
And then what happened to you? I mean, tell us a little bit about after the war.
Well, of course,
How old were you when you got out?
I think I was almost 21, or I was 21. I was 21. I think I just turned 21.
21 when you got out, and you'd done all this flying and
Right.
commanded this big plane and all that stuff.
But one of the best part, of course, of the whole war for me was I met my wife when I was in service.
I see. Well, tell us about that.
I met her in the USO in Santa Ana, California, and we were dancing. Her dad had to bring her, and her dad picked her up, of course. And but we were dancing, and we got to talk. Of course, I was a horse nut all my life, and asked her what she liked, what she'd done, and she said, oh, she had a horse, and she rode, and of course, turned me on right now. And so we were going, and my buddies, generally when we went in on a weekend, that's where we stayed at the USO headquarters, or where they had the dances and everything for servicemen. But we're sitting there talking, visiting, and my buddy come over and said, what are you doing, hanging out with that little gal all the time? You're going to stay with her all night? And I said, yeah. I said, hell, I may even marry her. I don't know. In a joking way, and it ended up that I did.
That's terrific.
But,
so did you guys carry on correspondence, or how did that all work out?
Which?
With your wife.
Oh, yeah.
What's your wife's name?
It was Ann Flanagan.
Ann Flanagan,
time,
okay.
But it was, yeah, we carried on. And I got to know horse people out there when I was at Santa Ana, and we'd meet. And I met a couple that they kind of took me in on weekends when they'd meet me at the bus depot where we got in from the base, and take me out to their place, and they had horses, and I rode, and I'd meet my wife. She'd meet me at with her horse, and we'd ride and everything.
Oh, that's
And,
terrific.
yeah, it was, and it started, and then we kept corresponding, of course, all through the war, and then we got married. We were going to wait until after the war, but we decided to get. Well, when I went to Lincoln at the Overseas Replacement Depot, I thought I run into some of my buddies there that had gotten married, and they said, "Oh, hell, why don't you get married? Get married." And so I thought, well, by gosh, maybe I will. And I just called her up and I said, "Do you want to get married?" And she said, "Yeah." And
Is that right?
so
Good for you.
she got on a bus, and of course gas rationing was on, and so her folks couldn't drive. They couldn't get the gas to drive clear from California out here. So Ann took a bus, and my folks, then she came here, and then my folks brought her on to Lincoln, and her only relation, she had an aunt that lived in Colon, Nebraska, which is right west of Lincoln, just a little ways, a suburb. So she would be the Flanagan representative at the wedding. And the night before the wedding, her aunt, Gertrude was her name, came to the hotel to meet everybody, and they walked in the hotel room, and she looked at my mom and says, "Well, I know you, you're Albina Januszewski." And it ended up that my wife's uncle had taught my mom in school.
Is that right?
And so it was a small world. But and Ann's dad, when we told him, he remembered my mom too. He was around the school when his brother was teaching school in eastern Nebraska.
I'll be darned.
So it is a small world. But
That probably made everybody feel a lot better too,
oh
didn't it?
yeah, it was.
Well, that was a big adventure
Yeah.
for you, and particularly for your wife. Imagine
Right.
that. How old is she?
Oh, I think she had to have her mom's consent, so she must have only been 17, I think.
Yeah, see? And she jumped on the bus and come out there to
Yeah.
marry you, huh?
Yeah.
God, she's a gambler. Hmm?
Yeah, she sure was, I'll tell you.
So then what happened to you then? So you got married, you went
Oh,
on
yeah.
through the service, and you
Yeah.
came back to Sterling, huh?
Sterling, yeah, and we started feeding cattle and farming and you name it, and I think we done it, so.
Did it all.
And yeah, that was another reason. Of course, I had 3 children when they tried to when they recalled the rescue outfit, in the Korean War. And if I'd known that I could stay in, I wouldn't mind going back,
Right.
and make a career of it. But I figured, well, as soon as it's over, they'll kick you out. So I didn't care about going. And the people in the rescue outfit, I knew them all. Well, they used to all come out here fishing and hunting with me, and they all kept telling me that, well, you don't have to go back in if you don't want to. And they kept telling me that, but they recalled and issued orders for me to go to. I went to Great Falls, Montana to be processed. And they said, just go before the delay board up there and tell them that you have 3 children and you served your time in World War II and don't care to go back. And you'll get kicked out again afterwards. So I went before the delay board up there, and they just sat there and looked at me and asked me what they could do for me. And I said, well, I don't feel like I want to go back in now. And they said, well, what else can we do for you? And they said, well, the person that issued the orders is the only one that can rescind them. So we can't do anything for you. And so I went to the motel. I was up there for 2 weeks at Great Falls, and I finally got a hold of the colonel. Was Colonel Soldier, and I knew him real well. He'd been out here a lot. Was our CO there, and he'd been transferred from Denver to, he was in California at Riverside then. And I finally caught up with him, and I told him that you have to rescind those orders. They said the person that issued them has to rescind them. And he says, well, I can't rescind them. I said, you're not in my jurisdiction now.
Oh, jeez.
I said,
Catch 22.
but yeah. And he said, and they can't take you if you don't want to go. And I said, well, maybe they can't, but they have. I'm assigned to Ellington Field in Houston, Texas. And I come home, and I got a 2-week delay en route between there and Houston, Texas. And I came home, and I called the commanding general and everyone else I could think of. Of course, it was the same old thing, passing the buck. And Otto Unfug was the Veterans Committee here at that time, and he said, well, let me call Ed Johnson, who was our senator in
Yeah,
Washington.
Ed, sure.
And he said, and I never heard anything from him, and I was supposed to report to Ellington Field, I think, on a Tuesday morning. And Sunday night, I had all my duds packed. I was ready to head out Monday morning for Houston, and Otto Unfug called, and he said, just forget those orders. Milo, he said, it's been taken care of. And I said, okay, and I kept thinking I'd get some orders rescinding those orders, but to this day I've never had them. And of course, when I'd stop in at Lowry, and some of those fellows were still there, and when I come in, they say, hey, there's that little AWOL guy.
Hey, well, what's that right there?
And I still didn't know what was going on, and like I say, I don't to this day. But another friend of mine, who incidentally did end up in fighters, and in World War II, he lived in Cheyenne, and I run into him after the Korean War and that, and he said, yeah, they'd sent him to Korea. He'd stayed in the reserve, in the National Guard in Cheyenne, and that's a fighter squadron there, but they recalled that squadron too, and he said they told him the same thing, that, well, you don't have to do. He had 3 children. His wife and one of his children had polio at the time, and they still took him. And they said they kept telling him, well, wait till you get the next base and go before the lay board. And he said, when you went to Ellington, you'd went from there to Korea. And he said, that's what I done. And he flew 100 missions in Korea.
Wow, is that right?
Out.
Fighter missions,
And
huh?
his wife had polio, and one of his children did, and they were. So.
That's so good.
But
And so then you've just, your 3 children, tell me about your 3 children. You got,
I have a boy and 2 girls. My oldest son is an artist. My next daughter was a barrel race and horse trainer. We lost her. And my youngest daughter is a RN in Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins.
oh, okay.
And
Where's your artist son?
he lives in Fort Collins
Fort
now.
Collins,
He lived in Colorado Springs for a lot of years, but they sold their home there and built a new home in Fort Collins about a year ago. But he's been real successful. He's got art galleries that contract his work.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, it is.
I need to send my daughter to him. She's an artist, but she's starving.
Is that right? Well, he's earned his. He worked for Current Lou Art Greeting Card Company for about 15 years.
Oh, okay.
But they were unhappy about his side business, his painting.
Sure.
But he finally, he hated to lose the security of it, but
Right.
he finally did, and now he's glad he did, because he has galleries. Well, people own the galleries in Jackson, Wyoming, and Scottsdale, and that, and another one in Vale or